Well, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining us back with the November 2nd County Commissioners regular meeting agenda. We have been recessed until now. We're at item 32, the public hearing at 6 p.m. And so just a little bit of the ground rules as we go forward, since there's a lot of people to talk and we want to hear everybody and have the chance. Thank you for joining the public hearing on the Aquifer Protection Overlay Zone's proposed regulations. The Casper Aquifer, as you are all undoubtedly aware, is the sole water supply for nearly 450 county residents and supplies between 50 to 60% of the city of Laramie's water. I think we can all agree that Casper Aquifer is an amazing resource, and that we all have an interest in protecting it. So for the reasons for the proposed regulations, from my perspective, using the best available scientific data to the regulations of a shared resource. The APAWS has not been updated in some time. The APAWS is a living document and will require changes as more information becomes available. Legally clarifying the APAWS boundary in a manner that its delineation is conservative, legally definable, and pragmatic. Align APAWS regulations with current Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality standards, and revise the regulations so that the unnecessary and confusing language is removed with the intent of making the regulations more understandable. So since we have people online and in this room, what we'll try to do is take 5 comments from people here, 5 online, 5 here, 5 until we run out of people. But we'll stay here until everybody has had a chance to speak. Each one of you will be given 3 minutes to speak. When you're called on to speak, would you clearly state your name so that we can accurately enter it into the record? If you would raise your hand on Zoom and keep it raised, I'll make sure to get you in the queue. I might not get you in the correct order, but I'll get you in the queue, that's for sure. And thanks for lowering your hand on Zoom when you have completed your remarks. Please try not to restate the previous comments or statements. It's waste a lot of your time. Also, for me, new comments and discussion are really important. I'll try to keep a list in my books here. Comments that are useful to me, but not me alone, are detailed, point to the section of the regulation that needs adjusting, are extremely helpful. Each commissioner at the end of public comment will have up to 15 minutes to state their comments. And then finally, I don't expect this to be a problem, but please refrain from personal or insulting comments directed at another individual, and direct all comments to the chair, please. Please refrain from clapping and booing, as that'll just take more time. So with that, I'd like to call the public hearing on the amendments to the Albany County Zoning Resolution, Albany County Zoning Resolution Aquifer Protection Overlay Zone open. And so would somebody like to speak first? 5 people here, and then we'll go 5 people online.
How do you do?
Yes, ma'am. Please.
Hi, my name is Janice Womack. I learned about these possible changes not from you. And I haven't had a great deal of time to look at all the issues. It's very important to have clean water for everybody in Albany County. Within the approved regulations that we're operating under, everybody in the county is operating under, the delineation method for setting the boundaries is clearly defined. It's mathematical. Anybody can repeat it and verify it. By changing both the boundaries and the method of delineation, you disconnect them and they become ambiguous and subjective. Under current approved regulations for the inclusion into the APLZ, 4E.1 specifically, is the process of how this is done. The county receives a written request, you check it out, it's supported with scientific verifiable information. Then per 4E2 of the current regulations, written request and evidence is sent to the property owner via certified mail. This is required by the board, by the zoning, to give the landowners a heads up. It's not a courtesy.
Thank you. Who would like to be next? And just to let you know that these are being televised out in the foyer, so if you want to make your comments and follow along, you're more than welcome to. Or you can sit out there and then come in whenever you have a chance. Anybody else? Oh, please.
I have copies of my comments.
Thank you.
My name is Kimberly Stark. I am the co-chair of the Casper Aquifer Protection Network. The citizens deserve answers for some questions. Did this commission comply with Wyoming? Did this commission comply with Wyoming statute section 18.5202? For each of the approximately 180 properties that are proposed to be included in the APOZ, did this commission comply with its own regulations, which include receipt of a scientific report, a possible independent review of that report, informing the affected property owners via certified mail return receipt requested, that their land use zoning may be changed, among other things? The proposed amendment to section D10A specifies which geologic setting is assumed for new and replacement septic systems. DEQ states the applicable reduction of nitrate and pathogens that septic systems in said geologic setting must meet. Septic systems designed to meet these standards are enhanced systems. What is the justification for supporting section D10A? Will DEQ chapter 25, section 19 standards be applied to section D10A? Since there are no exceptions in sections D10A, does it apply to all approved subdivisions, including the recently approved Rocky Ridge? The current western boundary of the APOZ was based on hydrogeologic and vulnerability mapping. What appropriate methodology was used to determine the proposed western boundary, and who made that determination? According to the EPA, the principal objective of a wellhead plan is to prevent the contamination of groundwater resources that supply public water supplies. Happen properties proposed for inclusion in the APOZ that are located down or cross gradient from the public water supply wells conceivably contribute contamination to these wells. APOZ development is any modification to the natural land surface that may result in the introduction of contaminants and or increasing the vulnerability of the aquifer to contamination. And the purpose of an SSI is to determine the vulnerability of the aquifer to contamination by the proposed APOZ development. Neither a request for a zoning change or a conditional use will modify the natural land surface. Why is an SSI required for these? Finally, it's obvious that this commission did not write these proposed amendments, and the public deserves transparency. Who is the author of these arbitrary, ambiguous, and harmful proposed amendments? I would appreciate a written response from each of you.
Sorry. Anybody else? Yes, sir, please.
I guess I won't be shy. My name is George Munson, Monnsson. I live at 2526 Mountain Shadow Lane in Sherman Hills. That's kind of in the southeast corner of the 1 acre lot area of Sherman Hills. I'm going to hit on a couple things today. I was a geologist in Wyoming for many years, so I have some hydrogeology background. Then I ended up going to law school here in Laramie, and I've been a local government attorney for many years since I graduated in 1987. I'm now semi-retired and have moved back to Laramie. And there are a couple things I wanted to mention to get into the record. First of all, when my wife and I bought our house, we had our water tested and did it twice. Now, there has been talk around about how excellent the quality of the Casper Aquifer water is. Our water, and I'm assuming our well, is probably around 200 feet. Most of the wells out there are. The first time we had it tested in the fall of 2018, our nitrates plus nitrites were 8.4. Had it tested again in May of 2019, and it was 12.0, which is above what's considered safe for all humans. Now, you know, we don't have any nursing mothers or infants in our household, so we don't have a problem with that, but my wife does use bottled water for coffee and tea. Secondly, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of numbers seemingly thrown around about advanced septic systems, the aerobic systems, which use oxygen, and the cost of them. I've done a little cursory research on that, and my research, again, internet research and some phone calls. Internet research seemed to say about $10,000 to $13,000 for a complete advanced system. Higher in extreme situations. There was one gentleman I talked to down in Colorado, in southern Colorado, who said in his area they were mainly used in the mountains where they did not have enough alluvium or place for a conventional leach field, and that they cost about the same as a conventional system, and their biggest expense was having to haul in sand, which is not a problem around here. I have several thoughts about some legal standards on this. This has been my area of expertise for some time, and I am not trying to sharpshoot the county attorney's office here, but you may want to query them about what I'm to bring up. I'm not your attorney, they are.
30 seconds, please.
Oh,
Please,
I'm
Jim.
sorry. Okay, I hadn't realized we were on
Yeah,
a time. Okay, the various references in the regulations to the Wyoming DEQ regulations. This may be an improper delegation of legislative authority, because the legislative body, like the commissioners, can adopt certain standards as they exist today. You could adopt the 2020 building code, but you cannot say the most recent edition of the building code, because that is delegating your authority to another body. So there are section 9, section 10, and section 4 all have references that may be legally challengeable because of an improper delegation of authority to the DEQ from this board. The second one, and I'll just quickly say that the language about best available technology is possibly legally too vague. You really, that's very subjective to say best available technology because it has no standards to it. What's best to me may be different to someone else. And so that is a problem with the language. It's possibly void for vagueness. So I suggest that you may want to query the county attorney's office to opine to you whether there is a problem with either improper delegation of legislative authority to the DEQ or whether that language could be considered void for vagueness. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Munson. A few more slots in this room. Anybody else want to speak? Yes, sir. Please come. I'm going to hear the gentleman in the green and then you.
You were first.
My name is Bob Starkey. I serve as pro bono geologist for CAP Network. I am a Wyoming registered professional geologist. As a professional geologist, I am required to be truthful in communication with the public. I have written more successful DEQ applications than I can remember. I am very familiar with DEQ regulations and the requirements regarding water and wastewater. Regulations must be clearly stated so that all parties understand what is required. The proposed amendments to the APOZ are very poorly written. How can someone support a document that is so arbitrary and capricious? I wouldn't voice these regulations on my worst enemy. Proposed regulations contain open-ended and vague requirements that potentially allow for endless denials for spurious reasons. Why not directly state that enhanced systems are required? Why the obfuscation? Many of the proposed amendments contradict and override DEQ regulations. The increased setbacks inferred in the proposed regulations would prohibit leach field replacement in most residences in east of Laramie subdivisions. If it is the desire of this commission to extirpate east of Laramie subdivisions, then these proposed amendments provide the means of doing so. This commission has violated its own rules in the current county zoning resolution for notifying affected property owners. Respect does matter, not just for people, but for laws too. One wonders why law-abiding property owners would obey unlawfully applied regulations. In typical overreaching government fashion, these amendments attempt to fix a problem that does not exist. The majority of this commission is willfully ignoring data that demonstrate the overall good health of the Casper Aquifer. I'm referring to 10 years of groundwater sampling by CAP Network. Also ignored is a USGS study that concludes that a city monitor well shows no conclusive evidence of human impact, even though an active septic system is located 100 feet away from this well. The majority of this commission is willfully ignoring decades of water quality of the city's municipal wells that show no significant increase in nitrate concentration. Instead, the majority of this commission relies on a handful of studies that are rife with confirmation bias, willful ignorance, and displain ignorance. In my opinion, the purpose of these pseudoscientific studies was to achieve political goals rather than to advance scientific understanding. It's all too easy to slap some grossly unnecessary, excessively expensive, and onerous regulations on a minority of voters. Regulations that two commissioners do not have to follow. C.S. Lewis wrote, "I dread government in the name of science." That is how tyranny comes in.
Thank you, Mr. Starkey. Yes, sir. Yes. And then we'll be online for the next slide.
My name is John Pacall, and I unfortunately live on this zone, or at least I live on the blue line of the zone. On your map, it's so thick, I'm still not sure whether I'm on it or not. But anyway, I have some significant comments. One of them is that this is supposed to be an amendment And when I looked at my document, I actually printed this thing out in color with all your red markings here for the new stuff. And at least 5 pages are completely red, and many others are mostly red. This is not an amendment. This is a complete rewrite of the regulation. And I have to ask why. It says that the purpose is to incorporate the findings of the Casper Aquifer Protection Plan, the CAP plan, and its updates. And just before I came over here, I checked, and the cap that's on the website is 2011. So if the cap hasn't changed, which is what this regulations are supposed to support, then why are the regulations changing and in such a dramatic fashion? I mean, it's almost all new. So that's the first thing. Second, I have to comment, somebody said that best available technology is probably not the best available wording. I would have to say it's probably the worst available wording. I made this comment years ago in front of this committee, back when they said that we should have undetectable nitrates in our water. And I said undetectable means different things depending on how the technology used to detect. And it changes with time, so it has no meaning. Best available technology, we can provide water, which is clean enough for, semiconductor processing if you want, but it costs millions of dollars. And so I'm assuming that you don't mean to imply that people should have a complete water filtration and treatment plant at their home in order to provide such clarity to their water before it is discharged. But according to this, you can certainly make that argument. That wording has to go. It makes no sense. The other thing I find extremely annoying is that for some reason, not only do we have to pay our expert to write a detailed report, we have to turn around and pay your expert to evaluate our expert. That also makes no sense and can't possibly be legal. I don't see how that works. If you want to hire somebody, go ahead, but you can't charge us for doing it. It's bad enough we got to pay to do our own. The other thing is, there's been inserted a new provision that you can't have a lot size less than 35 acres. So if you can now subdivide, if you have a 40-acre lot and you can subdivide, now you can't. You can only have the one dwelling on 35 acres. It's not clear to me why that's in here. If the property is following all the rules and regulations to make sure that they don't destroy the aquifer, then why can't they subdivide? The SSI. In the SSI, one of the reasons to do an SSI is if you want to subdivide. That makes no sense. Development possibly, but if you don't even have a development in mind yet, you just want to subdivide and sell off half your property. Even if you stick with the 35 acres, so let's say I got 70 and I want to subdivide into 2 35-acre lots, that still meets the requirements of everything. You aren't even developing anything yet. Why would you do an SSI just to do a subdivision? I don't get it. Finally, it's a little annoying to me because when I moved into my home, we did not have all these regulations. I would have never bought the place had I known this was coming, that's for sure. And these regulations seem to be trying to basically get rid of everybody who's on the aquifer by making it so difficult to do it that you just can't. My septic and well are separated by probably about 100 feet distance. I've had my water sampled. My water is not contaminated, perfectly drinkable. We do it all the time. So if 100 feet away is no problem, your well fields are much further away than that. Why am I paying tens of thousands of dollars extras in SSIs and fees and everything else to ensure clean water when I'm not doing anything to damage the water to begin with? Thank you.
Thank you. And online, we'll go with Mr. Paul Taylor first, followed by Klaus Halms. Good. Paul, the floor is yours. 3 minutes.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're loud and clear. Thank you.
Good. I'm Paul Taylor, 612 South 8th Street. I'm speaking here for Albany County Clean Water Advocates. We support passage of the proposed regulations, which are the product of many months of effort and already have been the subject of considerable public comment. We wish to thank the County Commissioners and the IT staff who have worked to make it easier for members of the public to participate in meetings and to send in comments via email or the comment form. The Casper Aquifer Protection Plan has been in place for 2 decades, but has not yet been fully implemented. These proposed regulations take 2 important steps towards that goal. The first step is to more accurately define the Aquifer Protection Overlay Zone to prevent the use of hazardous materials in the area where they are most likely to reach our drinking water, and to make all the boundaries follow property lines so everybody knows where they are. The second step is to retain agricultural zoning and large lots to reduce development and consequently pollution from septic systems, road runoff, pesticides, herbicides, and fertilizers within the aquifer protection area. We support the city and county cooperative effort to update the Casper Aquifer Protection Plan and encourage further efforts to implement its recommendations, particularly the installation of monitor wells to continually collect data on water quality. Abundant clean water is a scarce commodity in today's world. It is our responsibility to safeguard this precious resource. On a personal note, as a national touring artist in education, I teach the ancient Aboriginal Indigenous wisdom of caring for country. This is the oldest living culture in the world. The long-term foundation of a vital, healthy, prosperous, just, and surviving community is a custodial, caring relationship with your land and your water. These proposed regulations are all about caring for country. Thank you.
Mr. Taylor. Mr. Halmsgett, you're up. 3 minutes, please.
Can you hear me okay?
I'm clear. Thanks, boss.
My name is Klaus Halbsgett. So, dear commissioners, thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak with you once again. You all have had a tumultuous year, tackling many tough issues. So right out of the gate, I would like to thank all of you for the work you have done this year. I have no doubt it has been challenging. All of you and your staff have had a very long day, and I'm going to surprise you and try to be as short as possible. 50 years ago, the part of town where I live was connected to city water and sewer due to unsafe nitrate well water contamination. The nitrates that contaminated the well water apparently do not go away. The nitrates, let me rephrase it. I still have the original well, and so do some of my neighbors. One of my neighbors had his well tested recently. It is not safe to drink. That was 50 years ago that we were attached to city water and sewer. So because of that and many other reasons, I want to once again voice my strong and passionate support for protecting the Casper Aquifer. It has been overlooked for too long. I believe there is no more important issue for our community. I'd like to thank Paul Taylor, who just spoke before me, and suggest that people go to the Aqua website. There's lots of reports on a lot of tests that have been done on our aquifer. They need to be read. I sent all of you an email, and I wasn't the only one. I have tried to read them all. Residents of Albany County, can read all of these emails, including mine, at the Albany County government website under agendas and minutes. I was pleased to see the emails that support aquifer protection. I was most interested in the ones that did not. I hope we can find federal, state, or local funds to assist our residents that are retired, living on a fixed income, widowed, fiscally challenged, or plain just don't have the resources for septic system upgrades. If we all want clean water, it is our civic duty to assist our neighbors to achieve this goal. Obviously, if you disagree with me, you have that right. If you agree or disagree with the commissioners, you have that right. I just hope we can agree to disagree in a civilized manner. I look forward to the rest of the meeting. Thank you again, and as always, I hope you are well and staying healthy in these difficult times. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Halmsgett. We'll go Mr. Mullen, then followed by Mr. Anderson Sprecher. Connor, your 3 minutes.
Okay. Connor Mullen, I live here in Laramie on 4th Street. Thank you, Chairman Gosar, Commissioners Richardson and Ibarra. My name is Connor Mullen. I represent Sierra Club Wyoming. On behalf of our nearly 6,000 members and supporters in Wyoming, around 2,000 of whom live here in Albany County, I'd like to express our support of the proposed updates to the zoning resolution. Sierra Club Wyoming has submitted comments to you by email, so there's no need to repeat those. I'll just say that we place a lot of value on a world-class resource such as the Casper Aquifer. We're extremely fortunate to live so close to the source of our drinking water here in Albany County. Based on our staff's reading of the proposed regulations or updates to the regulations, we do not find that there will be any undue burden for anyone in the community. We appreciate your careful consideration of the proposed updates in that regard. We do believe that updating the regulations will be a win-win for the county and for generations to come. Thank you for hearing everyone out today, for being thorough in reviewing the community's comments, and for carefully considering the proposed regulations. We appreciate all your work.
Thank you, Mr. Mullen. We'll go Mr. Anderson Sprecher and then Ms. Frank following up, and then we'll come back into the public group. Mr. Anderson Sprecher, you're up.
Okay. I'm not speaking with any kind of prepared statement. I do live on the Laramie Plains subdivision, which is probably going to be one of the most affected groups from the aquifer. And I know there's a lot of concern amongst my neighbors about the possible increase in septic costs. That seems to be the biggest concern. It's been a little bit difficult trying to figure out what actual costs are likely to be. Looking on the internet, I did see some figures that sounded like they'd be a lot, but consulting with the septic installer in Albany County, he said it would be about $2,000 or $3,000 extra to meet the DEQ requirements. And that does not seem onerous to me. For the most part, I'm in support of what the commission is trying to do here, in particular, cutting out prohibited uses along Grand Avenue. So that's probably our biggest concern. So although people will differ in terms of philosophy and opinion, I would at least like things to be based upon when there's factual evidence, we could agree on what's the factual evidence. And I'm not sure we're there yet in terms of septic costs, but the best that I can do says that, yeah, this will not be onerous. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Anderson Sprecher. And then we'll go with Ms. Frank, and then Ed will, Mr. Consell, we'll get you on the next round online. Ms. Frank, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you very much, commissioners. So this has been a conversation that I've been actively involved and engaged in for many years, as I was served on the Planning and Zoning Commission and was chair when this aquifer protection plan that we're currently under was approved. And I just want, there's some things that have been unanswered through that whole time. And I think one of the main things that is concerning to me, and I do live on the aquifer, is that, and my property would be impacted by this regulation. You're asking a lot from people who have willingly, with their own money, tested their well on a regular basis. Ours was one of the wells that has been tested annually for the last 5 to 7 years as part of the CAP program. 10 years, sorry, last decade. We worked with the Starkies to do that, and we paid those charges out of our own pocket to confirm the status of our well, and it has always tested very well. But we have not received that same courtesy from recent developments within the city limits that are out east of town and above the wellhead. And I would refer back to Walmart Supercenter that turns into a truck stop anytime that I-80 gets closed. You talk about runoff being a concern. That's a major concern. It's, campgrounds, 18-wheelers, who knows what's in that parking lot. You have a new hotel with a lot of laundry being done. You have a new surgical center that was built that has aqua fitness equipment there. And you have major new subdivisions that have been built out east of town that are connected to the city water and sewer systems that have not been scoped out and tested. And I would question even have those new septic sewer systems, new sewer lines, are they double walled? So the burden is being put totally on the county residents at this point, and the city issues are not being addressed and haven't been addressed. And also looking at with the regulation with the best available technology, I think you may end up with some unintended consequences of that, because people may ignore problems and not get them fixed as quickly as they would under current regulations, and to the best available technology that they have in their budget and their property. Our property is our number one asset that we own in our lives. Typically, we have a lot invested in it, and this is infringing on our property right. And that's to develop and use our property. And by telling us how we can do that, you're infringing and going into our property rights that we have. And I think you might have some unintended consequences of that, where people don't get things addressed as quickly as they would because of financial concerns, because of regulation concerns. And then who's going to enforce this? Because what does the county have to do that? And what's the penalties? And then again, are you infringing on private property rights? That is our bundle of rights when we buy our house, when we buy our property. We have a bundle of real estate rights. And I believe that this infringes on one of those rights. And it is in my best interest to make sure that my property, the well is good, the water is good, and I work in the city of Laramie, so I am not going to do anything that jeopardizes my water. Thank you.
Ms. Frank, Mr. Consul and Ms. Leonard, we'll come back to you. We're going to go to the room here for the next 5 comments. Anybody here in the room like to make a comment? Yes, sir, please.
My name is Lyle Womack, and I live on Satanka Road. The TAP plan was developed to try and deal with a problem that the city themselves helped to create. The county was asked to allow the sale of small acre lots, some of them bought and sold by the city. Now you want to change it back. You're pushing the overlay zone even farther to the west to the agreed upon zone 2. Without any new qualified scientific evidence. I see this as not a threat to the water, but a deliberate attempt to restrict land use and generate license fees. It's getting a little too personal when you're going to force me to come to town and buy a permit every time I want to run my road drag to take the ruts out of my driveway. I know you want me to pay your engineer to come out and ensure that I'm not changing the contour of the ground enough to impact the runoff. The only contours in our property being a constant and steady decline to the west. Follow the science. Our well was completed at 120 feet in the Satanka formation, per the licensed driller's log and prior experience. Water samples were taken to the lab again last week, and the results examined by a currently licensed Wyoming geologist. This analysis by itself was inconclusive proof due to the high quality of our water, still concluding that the well completed in the Satanka Shale. Furthermore, the Jones #1 well was used for stratigraphic control to verify the subsurface inclination of the rocks and the mapped inclination. The mapped inclination of 4 degrees at Jones #1 applied to the Womack #1 well shows that the top of the Casper formation lies at a depth of 195 feet. The total depth of Womack number 1 is 120 feet. Therefore, the Womack number 1 well is completed in the Satanka Shelf. Additionally, 75 feet of Satanka Shelf separates the bottom of my well from the Casper Aquifer. Any western boundary of the APOZ should be representative of this information provided by 2 separate licensed professionals. Our property is bounded on the south by the east-west run of Satanka Road, and our well is located in the lower southeast corner. Our property exceeds all of the requirements of the AOPZ and should not be included. I shouldn't have to remind you that you represent all of the people in this county. Prior county commissioners exercise sound judgment by voting against the city's 5-mile parks and recreation expansion. It is your sworn duty again to represent and protect the rights of the people who live outside of the city.
Thank you, Mr. Womack. Anybody else? Okay, I'll go online here. Let's go with Mr. Consell. 3 minutes, please.
Yes, good evening. Can you hear me?
We have you loud and clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chairman Gosar. Chairman Gosar and Commissioner Arpa and Wilson, my name is Ed Consell, and I live on Palomino Drive, so I'm not in the protection zone. I'm on city services, but I am here tonight to support proposed amendments to the Aquifer Protection Overlay Zone because I consider protection of the water in the Casper Aquifer to be really important. And I also support the minimum lot size of 35 acres and the limiting of dwellings to 1 per 35 acres. Reason for this, to keep the density low and to minimize the threats to the aquifer. Many years ago, I worked for a city government and we had to go out and take samples and survey areas trying to determine how the septic systems were polluting the owner's own wells on subdivisions. They were smaller than the ones we're talking about here, and this was in the state of Oregon, so it was a different place. But the problem was, once the wells became contaminated, and this was mentioned a little earlier, once the water in those wells became contaminated, you can't do anything about it. It stays contaminated. So you're stuck with the problem of purifying the water or treating the water to clear all that out. And while I was thinking about all this, my mind flashed back to when I used to be a talk show host in Colorado Springs on KVOR. And I did an entire program on water rights 40 years ago. And the thing that came to me was the guest that I had was a water rights attorney. And after we discussed all the various problems that come up with water needs, water purification, water questions and everything, he closed with this quote: "The court battles and the actual wars of the future will be fought over water," which is a chilling thought with the widespread drought that we are experiencing in the western states. And all we like to say is that the water in the Casper Aquifer is a valuable resource. It can't be taken for granted, and we can't assume that past regulations are stringent enough to protect it. So I'd just like to say again, I strongly support these proposed amendments to protect the water in the Casper Aquifer, and if it becomes necessary, even more stringent amendments in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Consul. Ms. Leonard, you're up, please.
Hello, thank you for hearing me. I live on Blackout Trail out in the Sherman Hills area, and I would be affected by the amendment. I received a letter from the Starkies, where I assume it was listed as Kimberly Starky as the contact. And I believe they do their research pretty well. And according to her notes, the current amendment would require mechanical and electrical additions to the septic systems. And having been a general contractor and home renovator and builder, not just in Wyoming, but in Australia and California, I can tell you to electrify a septic system is going to cost you more than $2,000. So just a little point. I've lived in Laramie for 35 years. I've had relatives here for longer and in Wyoming. Having lived around the country, I can tell you that in some areas, anything that's spilled on the ground can be in your water within coming out of your faucet in 15 minutes. We don't have quite that issue going on here. But when I was an intern lawyer for the county of Albany, I also wrote memos for Hugh McFadden, who was the city attorney at the time, about the various issues related to the water in the aquifer. And we certainly noted that there were problems with runoff from various businesses that fed the Laramie River and businesses in the city of Laramie. And the thing that astonishes me is the incredible fixation on septic systems, which are not the biggest problem to the and danger to the aquifer. This summer, and over the 35 years, I have brought up numerous problems with pollution for the aquifer, including large piles of animal manure, over fertilization, fertilizers. This summer, they had a die-off of fish in Spring Creek and the pond over there near it because of over fertilization. I have also brought up large petrochemical spills that have occurred around town. And I've gotten absolutely almost zero reaction to any time I pointed this out. This summer, the tumbleweed, and I've sent pictures to you, Mr. Gosar, and to you, Mr. Richardson, about the numbers of trucks going to that location is essentially a truck stop. They're throwing bottles of urine on the ground. And, we're talking about people up here in Sherman Hills who a lot of us don't even have lawns. It's just prairie. We're not fertilizing excessively. And yet we are the focus because on the south side of town, we did have problems with, in the lower part of Sherman Hills, wells that have nitrate, but I would probably look to the amount of fertilization and unnatural substances they put on the ground rather than their septic systems, unless they've had a failed septic system. So, I think that this group of people, considering all the pretty severe problems going on around town, including, I did a tour of the aquifer area myself and some of the properties on the APOZ. You have some properties that are absolute dumps. There's hordes of material solidly packed on 3 or 4 acres, including vehicles leaking oil, old vehicles. And yet, when these things are reported, there is no enforcement. There's zero enforcement. And we have a group of people out here who regularly have their septic systems taken care of. And I consider most of the people out here to be excellent stewards of the land. They understand. I've had my well tested regularly. I have no problem with nitrates. So I'm not sure who's having these problems and what the source of their problem is. But there's a lot of us out here who just don't have any issues at all with the water. My water is absolutely excellent. But then I don't dump a lot of fertilizers and chemicals and pesticides on the ground either. So I think the issue is less about septic systems than it is about just absolute plain pollution and spillage. And like I say, I owned a lot of property in town at one time. And that was a constant battle to make sure people didn't dump gasoline and oil and.
You wrap it up, Ms. Leonard, please.
Okay, so I would be opposed to this because I think it's a taking and I think it's a disparate treatment. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Kennedy, I see your hands up online. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I will be referring to the red line version. First of all, on page 13, Romanet 11, where pesticides and herbicides, which I assume is a spelling error, the county is not free to regulate those under Wyoming Statute 35-7-374 prohibited acts, except as otherwise provided in the Wyoming Environmental Pesticide Control Act of 1973. No political subdivision of this state shall adopt or enforce any ordinance, resolution, rule, or regulation regarding pesticide storage, sale, distribution, notification of use, or use that is more stringent than the Wyoming Environmental Pesticide Control Act of 1973 or the rules promulgated thereunder. Further on page 6, item 1 and item 5, I believe that federal law should also read federal and state law. And on page 10, item 34, it is preempted by Wyoming Statute 3511-1414B. The purpose is to take primacy. Late last week, after I had seen the purported primacy agreement or delegation agreement with Wyoming DEQ from 2002, which was not signed, I inquired with DEQ, and they told me that they were unable to produce any copy of that document that had been signed by DEQ. I would submit that there may not be a delegation agreement in place unless it's the one from 1973. I have filed a public records request with DEQ requesting the delegation agreement from 1983 and 2002 with all appendices and have not yet received that. And I would suggest that we need to determine that there are valid delegation agreements in place before we would go any further with this change to the zoning regulation. I would also suggest that the date of that delegation agreement would mean that none of the current rules in Chapter 25 of DEQ are incorporated by reference. The earliest regulation of water quality by rule from Wyoming DEQ is dated of July 31st, 2012, and those rules have since been changed twice. And with that, I'd welcome any questions and thank you for your service.
Thank you, Commissioner Kennedy. Appreciate it. Yeah, I don't see anybody else online. How about here in the room? Would anybody like to speak? Yes, sir, please.
I wanted to speak.
Oh, Sally, I'll come with you next, please. You can go. Okay. Okay, Ms. Palmer, go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear. Thank you, Ms. Palmer.
Oh, no, thank God for you. Yeah, I'll be brief. I got my time set, but bless you for having this hearing, Pete. You know, it's good to talk to one another. And I'm intentionally wearing this huge patch because I had nose surgery. And that's what I find how we do patchwork on aquifers. Like, we have beautiful water, we have beautiful springs, but they can be patched up. So anyway, this is my metaphor for us. Two things. One is drought is real. So if you look at Laramie, it was formed over springs, and 8 of the other natural springs have dried up. If you drive down Social Springs Road, you don't see anything. hot springs, other springs. So we have to be, one of them was like, we have to be aware. We're in drought when there's time. If we don't wake up, the clean water we enjoy. My father lived in Chicago for 25 years before he died. Like the water that was so dirty, polluted, he's blessed. So that's one is like, let us just treasure what we have right here. Thank you for noticing that. And the other is the water is susceptible to toxins. So when we track what's happening in Wyoming, this is something that's happened to my face. It's scarred. But so also are those things that just impact on the clean water that we try to enjoy. And so the springs, the natural wells, the things that are here like the aquifer, it's not just about what happens on the I-80. It what happens to keep our water alive so it can give us life again. Thank you, Pete. And the rest of you commissioners like you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Palmer. We'll go to this gentleman here, and then Mr. Montoya, we'll come back to you online. Thank you, sir.
So you can hear me, right? Yep. Okay. My name is Manjit Pander. I'm living here since 2012 in Laramie, 168 Hunt Road. The reason I'm here, we are actually people bought the Tumbleweed Express gas station back in 2019. I'm trying to help a friend named, everybody probably know Bill Lepster out here. So we helped him out. I think we are the one who actually rattled the whole cage. Probably it's the reason we all here. Since then, everything is kind of priority, becoming an aquifer, becoming priority. So I believe that when we started as station, we had no bad intention. All we got just letter after letter, and we went through the legal process. We all know. But the reason I'm here for a humble request that because tumbleweed was not stopped, and a lot of people took it as an embarrassment. I don't know who did. Peggy Trent is our county attorney, I guess. So she made it personal with the company. We kept on moving. So with what we did, what I feel is that when it comes to best available current technology, county has two different standards. When we initiated the best available current technology, we were dismissed that, oh, this is an expansion, doesn't matter how current technology it is. We brought 2018 specs, and county literally willfully, as Mr. Bob Starkey said, willfully ignored and willfully dismissed, even knowingly this is a county was happy with 1968 standard with single wall steel line, 1/4 inch line over 3-inch fiberglass double wall system. They said, no, you cannot install it since it's an expansion. Couldn't prove it, but best available. So what happened is, I literally think county undermined its own credibility back then. So now if they come in with the best available current technology just to punish the people, they have nothing to do with tumbleweed. I mean, over 70% of the people that live out that way, the house, the ranch, the land they live on, that's the basic retirement. And if we put their livelihood in jeopardy because tumbleweed came in and was a series of newspaper, and after that, I mean, we took more bashing. I mean, I've been doing business from California, New Mexico, Texas, Colorado, Wyoming, Nebraska. This is the only county literally turned the other way when we brought the new technology in. If you go do it in San Francisco or in Fresno, state and county would roll the red carpet. You guys are putting this much money just in the piping, and we did here what we did. Our name was in the newspaper every day. Wrongfully accused, the breaking the law, the digging the trench, and we were thinking, I mean, either they don't have any person on a payroll that who could actually tell them what is right, or they literally just, going against us. I ask everybody, so what do you do? I mean, honestly, everybody in Laramie here is either hydrologist or zoologist. There's no normal people live out here. Everybody you ask them, seriously, it's like not enough Indians, too many chiefs. That's what it is. Everybody has their own opinion. And then you ask them, hey, who's the right person? Can we talk to somebody county? We talked to Peggy Trent. Peggy Trent literally dismissed it before it started. I came to her office and said, Peggy, this is what we're doing. That's the plan. We send them the plan 6 months in advance before we start digging. Nobody looked through it. All they did send a letter of cease and desist without looking at the merit, without looking at. So when all you guys are talking about all this best available technology, it doesn't make any sense. Like when we came in, brought the best technology, what we got blasted, we will shut you down, we put a TRO on you without any merit. All we did was the station was shut down, and there was a person, I think he's on a county commission, zoning and planning, Vern Hinckley. I talked to him, I walked up, I said, what was your plan if you didn't buy the station with the station? The station shut down, only runs 6 months in a year, maybe 4 hours a day. Vern Hinckley's word, he said, we thought the station would fade away. 3 12,000 gallon tanks would fade away in thin air. I mean, that is it. That is the logic. I mean, you asked DEQ, we talked to state, and state was scratching the head. And state said, county said, you cannot replace your tanks. I said, yeah, we have brand new fiberglass tanks put in the ground. And they said, so they basically taken $5 to $6 million. If there's a spill or there's a leak, they said, county's taking on their own head. And I said, absolutely. They said, you cannot do this. I mean, so everybody is for the current available technology. That's what we got punished with. Brand new, over $500,000 tank sitting in the ground. County said, no, you can't put it in. You cannot put new lines in. You cannot put new lines in. Why? I have no reason. I have no idea what's the reason for it. I don't know, Mr. Pete Gosar, you were bashing it even came for a sign. I mean, they said sign would jeopardize Aquifer, a price sign. After our sign, 3 more signs went up. Maverick put a same sign, nobody had a problem. St. Clair put a big sign, nobody had a problem. But when Tumbleweed put a sign, no, it would jeopardize a price sign. We just took the old sign off. All we had to do, put a new sign in the ground. That would jeopardize.
Mr. Bender.
So I'm saying, please stop undermining our own credibility by just, moving the goalposts left and right and work together. If there's a real issue as a community, I think what we're doing is tearing it apart just to take some brownie points, honestly. I mean, I don't see if there's anything, all we're doing is separating this group from that group. Maybe somebody had a political leverage today, somebody else would have it tomorrow. I think if there's a really concern, everybody has to sit down and you can take more time and ask people, 70% people's retirement plan, we're just gonna go down the drain because, they can't do it. I think that's not fair. Just don't punish them because of Tumbleweed Express. That's all I'm asking.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Montoya, you're up, and then we'll go to Sarah Gorin online. Paul, can you hear us?
Thank you. Can you hear me okay?
I do. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Gosar, fellow commissioners. Whereas I believe a lot of what is being put into the amendments is a good thing, I do think that there is quite a bit of overreach, especially as far as land use involved in this. And again, I would really suggest that the county commissioners look at their comprehensive plan that was put together years ago and make sure that this is kept in mind for the total package within the county and that this isn't just knee-jerk reaction. I think sometimes the planning commission and the county commissioners don't look closely at the comprehensive plan, and I think you need to make sure it's in sync. I do hope, and maybe this has been brought up before, I apologize, I joined a little late. I do hope that Commissioner Richardson will be recusing himself from the vote due to the fact that he is a septic pumping company, and he really should not be voting on an issue such as these amendments. And at this point, that's really all I have to offer. And I thank you for your time and for listening to me.
Thank you, Mr. Montoya. Ms. Gorin.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Commissioners. Good evening. My name is Sarah Gorin. I've lived in Laramie nearly 40 years, and I've been active in politics and with nonprofits in the community. I've closely followed the process of amending these regulations, and I can assure everyone that the planning staff, the county attorney's office, and the commissioners have spent many, many hours working on this proposal. I've listened to the testimony tonight, and I've read all the comments in the commissioner's packet. In response to some of the comments that have been made, especially regarding best available control technology, that definition applies only to the discussion of damage of a non-conforming use. It does not apply to homeowners. The commissioners themselves clearly have the authority to change the boundaries of the Aquifer Protection Overlay Zone, as they can change any part of the zoning resolution following the required process that includes public notice and comment. I appreciate the point about what's happening in the city, and it's commendable that this commission and the city council are cooperating to make effective use of taxpayers' money and work toward comprehensive aquifer protection. Homeowners legitimately are concerned about costs, but that concern is not relevant to these regulations except for the small group of homeowners who will be brought into the APOZ due to the proposed boundary change. The boundary change is scientifically supported and necessary to prevent storage and use of hazardous materials where they can most easily reach our drinking water. And I wholeheartedly agree with the earlier comment about seeking financial assistance when the time comes to replace a system for people who have fixed incomes or otherwise limited means. Everyone else within the aquifer protection area already was and remains subject to DEQ requirements applying to septic systems discharging into a public water supply. This was re-emphasized by a letter from DEQ to the county commissioners as recently as last December during the permitting of the Rocky Ridge Estates subdivision. The DEQ requirements specify a performance standard rather than installation of any specific system. There's no specific requirement for an automated system. That is good in that it allows flexibility, but bad in that it creates uncertainty. The one certain thing here, I think, is that no one, whether they have a private well in the aquifer or get their water from the municipal system, wants to drink degraded water, even if it's technically legal. I think we can do better than saying the solution to pollution is dilution. I think the path forward here is through the delegation agreement, which exists, at least in theory, where the county has the responsibility to enforce the DEQ standard. My suggestion is that the county adopt the proposed regulations and then arrange a sit down with DEQ and interested parties to lay a more definitive framework for enforcement of the standard, which first and foremost, we need to keep in mind is aimed at protecting the quality of our drinking water. There's plenty of experience with installation of septic systems of all kinds in other parts of our state, including areas where installation of advanced system is completely routine. We don't have to reinvent the wheel. This is a tractable issue and it can be worked out. I thank you very much for your time and attention and your hard work on this.
Ms. Moran. Is there anybody here in the room since we've been online here for a couple? Yes, sir, please.
I'm Mike Dunley. I live at 4521 Metal Arc Lane in the Laramie Plains Edition. I'm a block down and a block over from the Tumbleweed gas station. I have no problem with that guy's gas station. I thought he did a great job. He's given a fair shake to all the people of Laramie. His price is 20 to 30 cents cheaper than anybody else. And if Mr. Heber has to be reclused, then you two have to be reclused because you live in the city, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong. Okay, so all you guys should vote on this thing. I do not want to pollute the aquifer. I don't think anybody in this room wants to pollute it. I really think you're going way overboard on this. I had my well tested. I even had the U.S. Geology. I volunteered my well. I can't remember, about 15 years ago. The lady came out, said, I have great water. She said, the only problem I had was radon. She said, everybody in Laramie has radon. In fact, people above me, people below me, my water is still excellent. If I have to put a new septic tank system in, I'm sure it's going to be $30,000. I should be able to just replace that leach field or replace that tank. I don't think I should have to upgrade to an EPA. That's a typical government agency that just is bureaucracy at work. I just don't think it's fair for the people who have septic tanks. I want to know if you could tell us sometime. There's a test monitoring well between Walmart and Bone and Joint. I'd love to know what it's showing. If it's saying we're polluting, then we've got a problem, but I don't think we do. And also, my wife and I walk around that area every day, and this summer, for 2 or 3 days, that cap on that well was off. For me, if any idiot wanted to, they could pour a whole bunch of bags of fertilizer in there and we'd be completely screwed. So maybe you guys should think about putting portable, how would you say, sheds over there, so nobody can mess with that. But that tap was off for 2 to 3 days. And I know you guys got a tough job. It's a thankless job, but I think we might be going overboard on this. Thank you.
Anybody else in the room?
I already spoke, but can I ask a question or? Because I already spoke. I don't know if I can say something at the end, but something's come up from listening to all this that I'd like to ask.
Okay, come on up, please. Should we make it quick, please?
Yeah.
Thank you.
So I'm John McCall again, and the one thing I was curious about is that most of the people who seem to strongly support these changes seem to have been aware of this process all along and been well informed and everything. And most of the people who do not seem to have been kept completely in the dark and just found out about it recently. So my question is, why is that the case? How does everybody in support of this, how did they all know about this process and been seeing it all along and nobody else knew about it? I don't think you guys can answer that, but thank you.
Anybody else here in the room? Let's go ahead, please, Kim.
Kimberly Stark again. I just want to point out that you put the county attorney's office in an untenable situation if you pass these proposed regulations.
Anybody online? Sally, please. Go ahead. You're muted, Ms. Palmer. There you go.
I'm not Miss Palmer, I Sally with no surgery. Anyway, I read the Boomerang. I live in London too, and I find when people ask questions of matter of fact, which is just asked, it's like if it doesn't appear to Boomerang, and some people read Wyoming file, then we just don't know. And thank you for asking and for inquiring and being open. But it's like, no, the communication gaps are huge right now. And I thank you for all of you county commissioners who are like knowing the gap, you know, and being accessible. That's what makes a democracy in my perspective. But I just find that it's hard to get information out there because the booming shrinks and then our knowledge shrinks. But I don't want to speak too long. Anyway, thank you for being there and for opening the transparency is big.
Thank you. Last call for, yes, sir, Mr. Munson, please.
George Munson again, and I just ran out of time the last time, so just one point, and Mr. Gertz might be able to answer this for me. One thing I did not find in the redlined version of the amendments is a trigger point between repairing a septic system and replacing a septic system. Typically, it's the leach field that fails. Would that be considered a repair? Is it done on the basis of cost, where you say it costs more to repair it than to put a new one in? You know, I just, that's a question in my mind that hasn't been answered yet. And, you know, if it is not there, it needs some kind of a trigger point. It's just like repairs to any other non-conforming use. You know, if the repairs are more than the cost of the property, you have to cease the non-conforming use. So that's all I have to raise. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay, last call online. Please, Ms. Eagle.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Chairman Gosar and commissioners. This is really the way government should work, having all of us citizens being able to speak our piece. I've been working on the Casper Aquifer Protection Plan for many years. As I was present when Vern Hinckley gave a presentation that nitrates were leaching into the aquifer, and the county did their own study later to find that indeed nitrates were leaking into the aquifer, even on relatively recent septic systems. And so we should be concerned. We should make sure that we have only a certain limited amount of septic systems on a given piece of property. And that's why the 35-acre lots is so important. So I really am in support of all the regulations that you've worked so hard, and we have all worked so hard to change. If you don't know about it, it's easy to find out. And I appreciate everyone who's been here. I hope you will all join the effort to make sure our clean water stays clean. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, looks like I don't have anybody else online. Yes, sir, please.
I'd like to address the chair. Danny Dunleavy, I've probably been here the longest. See one back there, maybe been here a while too. So we remember gas at the Tumbleweed, which then was the Hudson at maybe 18 cents, maybe 13, something like that. But it lived on the aquifer the whole time. That's why my folks moved there, my grandparents there. We built our well 65 years ago. They went 250 feet before they hit water. When you go 250 feet then, just like some people today, you don't have the money to go any further. So what do? You wait a year, which is what they did then, where they could save up enough money and build another 50 feet. They hit water at 280 when they hadn't drilled 300. And we have a great well today. To this day, we're taking care of things. Things go bad with our septic, we fix it. I think we've been excellent stewards of our water. That's why my folks moved there. And I think I can speak for most of my neighbors, all of my neighbors that I know, that they take care of their septics, they take care of their water when things go bad. They do. To penalize these people and cost them money that they probably don't have with all these, what I would call unnecessary regulations or mandates, however you want to call it. Seems to be like you're trying to do something that isn't necessary. You guys were voted in to protect the aquifer, you say, but that isn't doing it. It isn't broke. In our case, we test our water, everybody out there. I know that countless do. We work with the CAP network. There's been some good things that have come out of this. Adding to it unnecessary items and screening people that probably can't continue to fix whatever. If it's going to be 30,000, are they going to fix it? If it's going to be 10, they're probably going to do it. You're going to get unnecessary results from your objective. And our objective is to have clean water. Thank you.
Yes, ma'am, please.
I'm Sandra Ike from Black Elm Trail, and I've listened quite carefully to all of you speak. I think that it would be wise if the commissioners review their tapes on this. There was a lot of emotional comments and there were a lot of factual comments. I certainly think the factual comments need to be reviewed and make sure that you are acting in a manner that is appropriate for a legislative committee like this. I will also comment that the CAP network, it has been keeping a very close watch on the septic systems and nitrates and so forth. And I would have to question any of the nitrates from up there going into. I have personally seen results, not only from my own property, from other properties that have had their wells tested constantly. So I would certainly hope that you all have the foresight to review all of these comments.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Please.
My name is Eric Lewis. I live in Jefferson Street, much like you guys. I live in the city. So this doesn't affect me, right? I drink water, so that just doesn't affect me. I go to the bathroom. That affects me too. So here's the deal. I love government overreach. You guys are doing a great job with it. It's just not going to work. Still conceived. You guys have set this up already without having statutes listed out. It's not legal muster. So I was trying to figure out why you guys are doing this. If you can devalue the land a little bit, maybe the people around will stop growing. That can't be it. You devalue it, you lose your tax money. Keep digging around on this one, and this just has no reasoning behind it. These are the most tested people in the land, in our region, all the way through the county and everywhere else. And they're not out there running amok with their nitrates on the ground because they get tested for it. The people in the city, now they're not getting tested for it. And I can tell you, being a pesticide herbicide specialist, they're running amok with their nitrates in the ground. So I think if you're going to be looking at it, you should be looking at a full square on this whole deal. This doesn't benefit anybody. You guys aren't doing anything extra special on this. The only thing it's doing is deterring the people that are out there. The people that are getting hurt on this one are the ones that are going to have to spend the extra money. And then the generations down the road that look at it and think the property value decreasing out there as well. So I am sincerely opposed to this. I'm a city guy. Thanks.
Anyone else in the room here? Anybody else online? Yes, Mr. Kennedy, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Keith Kennedy, and I spoke as a private citizen earlier. I will now mention to you that I am on the Planning and Zoning Commission. And earlier it was mentioned that Wyoming Statute 185202 has not yet been observed. And I would point out to you as a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission that this has not gone through the Planning and Zoning Commission. And with that, I'd welcome your questions.
Mr. Kennedy. Okay, last call for the online. Last call here in person. Okay, commissioners, I'd entertain a motion to close the public hearing. Second. Been moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing and seeing that, all in favor signify by saying aye, please.
Aye.
Aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Okay. Commissioner Rivera, let's go with you first, if you would. Then we'll come to Commissioner Richardson, and then I'll come off at the end there.
I want to thank everyone for your comments tonight and for presenting your input in a civil and respectful manner, both those people with us on Zoom and people here in person. Thank you very much for that. Let me remind you that private well owners and those who are on the municipal water system have the same goal: to drink clean water. Reasonable people can work together to make this happen and to ensure that our drinking water is safe for future generations. This is not just a health issue, but an economic issue for all of Albany County. If serious measures are not taken to protect our aquifer, potential businesses and possible future residents may be deterred from coming here. The proposed amendments to the current regulations have been in the making for over 2 years. And while these regulations are not perfect, They are a solid document from which to continue the crucial work of protecting our aquifer. And because this is a working document, it will be subject to change as more information is acquired and situations merit. These APAWS regulations will require continued attention and public participation. Many of you may not be aware that the city and county have just signed a contract to employ a firm that will be providing a unified CAP that will serve both governing entities. This unified approach will save taxpayers money and reduce the potential for confusion. It may also provide recommendations on how we can continue to improve our APOZ regulations. Not only this evening, but through multiple comments submitted to the commission online, we have heard support for and disapproval of some of the components of these regulations. I wish to address a few of these now that we received the most comments. The western boundary of the APOZ. For years, the city and county have known that there exist errors regarding the western boundary. The current zoning resolution uses the county's CAP definition of the area where the upper boundary of the Casper Formation is not covered by at least 75 feet of the overlying Setanka Formation naturally in place. The proposed change to the resolution would offer that the APOZ boundary is indicated in the Albany County zoning macro and incorporates known geological data and follows defined property lines. This new definition would still allow for exclusions based on evidence that there exists more than the required 75 feet of undisturbed Setanka Formation. I think we can all agree that an insufficient APOZ boundary that allows the use of hazardous material in a place where they can reach the supply of our drinking water will result in far worse consequences than requiring a property owner to go through the process for an exclusion. With the western boundary change, nothing changes for those who are already in the APOZ. All new APOZ homeowners will become subject to the table of prohibited uses, may become subject to DEQ regulations on septic systems and aquifer supplied municipal wells, and cannot install, maintain, or use a septic system within 100 feet of a vulnerable feature unless no significant threats to groundwater can be documented. These requirements already exist for those who are currently in the APOZ. Minimum lot size. In the county's attempt to determine the level of development the Casper Aquifer could safely sustain, 35 acres with one dwelling has been proposed as the minimum lot size. This proposed amendment is supported by the Albany County CAP, where large lot zoning is listed as a regulatory management strategy. With this change, all previously and newly established APOZ homeowners will not be allowed to subdivide into lots smaller than 35 acres. From the most recent scientific study that was commissioned by the Albany County Commissioners, Wenk Associates in 2019, the detected elevated nitrate concentrations have been attributed to the high density of septic systems. The study goes on to state that the city's Burr and Turner wells could potentially be impacted in the future by nitrate concentrations with a small lot residential zoning designation. While the Pilot Hill Recreation Area brings opportunities for recreation and education, it only protects 13% of the APOZ. There still remains 87% that needs to be protected from further development. The larger lot sizes will help to reduce the impacts of septic systems, fertilizers, pesticides, and herbicides that come with small lot zoning. We have received comments to the effect that this is a taking. While there exists considerable information on the subject of zoning and takings, adopting a minimum lot size draws no conclusion supporting a taking. Further, there are no data to indicate that a 35-acre property inherently is worth less than dividing it into smaller properties. The truth is that an owner does not have the right to do whatever with his or her land especially if it is to the detriment of the greater public. And every new septic system adds to the overall groundwater system, where eventually the entire system is compromised. Enhanced wastewater system. Probably the one topic we received the most comments for was this one. In case you are not aware, I know now you have been made aware this night with all the comments, but state regulations have existed since 2018 that required septic systems located with the APOZ to meet Wyoming Department of Environmental Quality Standards for septic systems in the same aquifer that supplies a public water supply net. Why you did not know, I don't know either. This just became something that I learned of as I became a commissioner. This was, again, given out last December, and I'm not sure why that wasn't made a little bit better known to the general public. This DEQ regulation was cited in a letter to the Albany County Commissioners last December. Contrary to the misinformation being circulated, this regulation does not mandate any particular kind of system, but rather it requires sufficient treatment to reduce the nitrates to less than 10 milligrams per liter and provide the removal of pathogens before the discharge leaves the property boundary of each small wastewater system. The regulation goes on to say that an enhanced wastewater system may be required in order to meet these requirements. If and when an enhanced system is required, it is proposed by the DEQ that Albany County can work with the department to ensure the appropriate system can be installed that will accomplish the reduced nitrate level. I'm not sure that the DEQ really knows how it will address this, as there is currently no way to directly assess whether a system is meeting the stated standard. Nevertheless, it is a DEQ requirement. DEQ, the delegated authority in Albany County, and we commissioners will have to look this further to develop a process that is understandable to homeowners. We understand that this is an added expense to homeowners. According to DEQ, there are approved enhanced systems that would only run $2,000 to $3,000 more than the conventional system. Albany County may be able to identify funding that would help homeowners pay for the expense of upgrading their septic system, and the commission will direct the grant department to do so. These proposed regulations are not arbitrary and capricious. They are grounded upon science-based studies, community advocacy, and thoughtful preparation. Strengthening our APOZ regulations now will benefit our community as a whole. Our legacy to future generations will be that we all cared enough today to take measures to ensure the same quality drinking water that we have all had the privilege to drink. I support the proposed amendments, and I will vote to approve them.
Thank you. Commissioner Richardson, please.
I have lots of notes here. I almost don't know where to start. I will say that the comparison with the Casper, comparing the Casper Aquifer with like someplace in Oregon or Missoula, Montana, or West Laramie is not appropriate. And the reason is, take West Laramie for example, they're drinking surface water, alluvial water that has no separation, or they were before they had a water system put in. So basically, if you have some hard pan shale and you got, sand and gravel on top of it that is, the water table, and you're leaching septic leachate into the same water you're producing your well out of, that's different than it being separated by hundreds of feet of barely permeable or varying levels of permeability, and geologic time is a long, long time. There's a lot of time for treatment and filtration in a situation like that. So it's really important, and I've seen this for a long, long time. I've watched people say, well, over here, they've had this issue, so that must be what's happening here. And any geologist or hydrologist or policymaker for that matter knows that that's not appropriate. What does it mean when a septic system fails? I have expertise in this area. I know that septic systems do treat water. They do remove nitrates. They wouldn't be in use if they were as ineffective as, I mean, they're just everyone's favorite thing to bash, right? One of the things that's important to be aware of is that the city produces millions of gallons a day of water out of city wells. And you imagine how often your tap is open in your house if you have, well, if you're in the city or anywhere. I don't know how many structures there are in the city, but I know that the wastewater plant takes in about 4 million gallons a day of wastewater. And some of that is infiltration, right? From, storm water table, leaky pipes underground. In other words, not all of that is come through somebody's tap. Some of it just comes from the ground. And when you take a few hundred occupied structures where people go to work, the notion that dilution is not the solution is totally not correct. As a matter of fact, everything we depend on in the whole wide world has to do with dilution being the solution, right? The whole reason that we would have a standard for density on the aquifer would be to balance how much nitrate loading you can have without damaging the water, which is a dilution equation. So it's a cute thing to say, but it's not really true that dilution is not the solution. If we sucked all the oxygen out of this room and only nitrogen and CO2 were left, we'd all be dead in a few minutes. And so dilution is the solution. We get enough concentration of oxygen in here, then all of those other things aren't toxic anymore. So what does it mean when a septic fails? It means that it stops leaching. The time when a septic system leaches the most, the fastest, the best is when it's first installed. So I've heard for years and years people complain about failing septic systems and what that might do to the aquifer. And what it does is it ruins someone's basement. It doesn't do anything to the aquifer. As a matter of fact, the older a septic system gets, the less well it leaches and the more residence time the leachate has in the ground for the bacteria to clean up the nitrates and nutrients that are in it. So when I try to have a conversation about these things with people who don't even understand how a septic system works, or how it removes nitrogen, or what the bacteria do, or what they're feeding on, or what, it gets pretty tough. Nitrates are naturally occurring, so you probably can't ever get to zero. Here we are, we're at the top of the world where we have an aquifer that's east of all of the development, where it's open to the sky and there's no live water running off the hill. It all runs into the ground. That, when you consider how much precipitation, how many acre feet of water land on the Laramie range, that is a huge amount of water, a huge amount of water. The drip, drip, drip of a septic system, even if it doesn't treat the water, even if it was the original amount of nitrates, can't touch what's coming in underneath through matrix flow and conduit flow. And the difference, conduit flow is like water running in a pipe. I'm getting all hydrologist on you. Matrix flow is how water would sort of move through tight dirt. It can't run a worn path. It just really slowly moves, and it takes some sort of head pressure on top of it to kind of push it down through the particles. There's all kinds of things happening there that are actually a protection for the water. There are a lot of tropes offered related to vulnerability. In some cases where there's a fault, it actually acts like a curtain. So if you drill on the upgradient side of the fault, there's water pooled there. If the fault was so permeable that it was going to, take anything you put in on the surface, it certainly wouldn't hold water back. It would be a conduit for water to go away. So if you drill on the bottom side of some of these faults, there's way less water, and it's at a different level, in terms of depth than on the top side of the curtain. So it's mind-boggling to me how much traffic there is and misidentification of what the risks are and what the, another thing is that our regulations would treat the entire aquifer overlay zone the same, except that it's not all the same, right? So if you just fit in that boundary, then you're going to get treated a certain way, even though there's a wide variation in terms of vulnerability from one place to another. The cost of enhanced systems. There is no septic system that can meet the DEQ standard for enhanced systems that doesn't require mechanization, and the components alone are 10 or 12,000 without the labor. So if, in theory, you aren't required to have, timers and pumps and relays and switches and, all of this business, but you can't attain the desired nitrate reduction without purchasing that. So it's interesting to me that some people minimize and are sort of dismissive of what happens to property owners. I guess if you live on the aquifer, it's your responsibility to protect, the drinking water of all of the citizens of Albany County, or the 85% of who live in the city of Laramie without any help, financial help. It's also important to point out that where the city produces water, where the wells are, isn't very much where the septics are. In other words, we have this, so 13% of the aquifer, being covered by the Pilot Hill purchase, that is true. But where the city wells are, it's not particularly relevant, and where the development is, it's not particularly relevant. There's all kinds of baits and switches built in from, all over the place. When it comes to my conflict of interest, the fact that I have additional and extra expertise is not a reason to assume that I have some sort of nefarious or ulterior motive. The fact of the matter is there's a certain number of people who want to live in town and be on a water and sewer system, and a certain number of people who want to live outside of town. And for the most part, they don't care where they live. Also, I get about 5% of my business's total revenue from septic pumping in the APOZ. It's not a really significant thing for me. And if building occurs somewhere else, those are my potential customers. If you can't put a septic in on the APOZ and you put it in somewhere else, it's the notion that I would subvert or make subservient my duty as a commissioner to my personal interest in, making a living for my family is insulting, and it's not appropriate. I don't know what the scientific data to support the 35-acre subdivision limit is, but it's really important for us, if we're going to make regulations, to make sure that the regulations match the risk. There's something called a noble lie, and that is you take something virtuous and you use it as a weapon, right? So no one could be for dirty water, including me. The question is what's required to protect the water of the city and all the residents up there. And the current regulations do it. As a matter of fact, the current regulations go too far. And the reason for that is well, I can't explain all the reasons that I've learned over all the years that I've been a commissioner. I probably should get an honorary PhD in geology and hydrology because I have to think about these things and understand them. A noble lie is a trap. It says that if you don't do this, our water's it's gonna be terrible. We can't, so we'll have bad drinking water and it'll cost, umpteen $1 million to create a wastewater, a water treatment plant that can deal with denitrifying the water. What's important to understand is that there has to be some proportionality understood. You can't write regulations when you don't know what the actual risk is. So the assumption made in this writing, and the assumption made by the activists is that that the risk is here, that there's no tolerance for anything else, and we have to go and do what we can go and do. So for whatever reason, I get my character maligned because I don't subscribe to that theory. I want the regulations to match the risk. And everything I've ever seen as a commissioner says to me that, but it's technical, right? It's really hard in a meeting like this or in any meeting for the truth to be understood when there's so much passion and politics and so on and so forth. So the risk, it is true. The aquifer is valuable. It's also somewhat vulnerable. We haven't necessarily appropriately identified what the threats are, and we've misidentified some of the threats, those being septic systems. I do believe that there is and should be a minimum lot size requirement. I also think that there's sort of a fixation with certain groups of people in our community on the aquifer, and that's actually not a very good place to build. It's really expensive to jackhammer utilities through, build roads. It's not really a very good place to develop. It's expensive, it's hard. So we have challenges that people don't like being told what not to do, especially Wyomingites. We're pretty libertarian. We just really don't dig it. And when you go south, north, west, there's all kinds of developable land. And a builder and a developer, they don't care really where they build or develop. If there's a demand, they want to fill that demand and make a living doing it. So we have become so focused on the aquifer that we don't create opportunities in the other places. And the whole point is, if I have to pay X number of dollars to go through a process to, and the political process that is absolutely a disaster, to get a 10 5-acre lots approved or something, I might just rather go do that somewhere else, providing that the infrastructure and the opportunity is there, and it's probably less expensive now already. So the city is the county is about, we're making arrangements to sort of have a joint sort of extraterritorial development plan, wherein within a certain space of the municipality, it's good for the municipality to not get boxed in by little ranchettes, because at some point you need manufacturing, you need hotels, you need commercial buildings, you need to be able to grow. It has been very bad for Cheyenne to get boxed in. And so what could be a joint development set of regulations for within that space isn't really about the aquifer, or it shouldn't be. It should be about how you get infrastructure such that developers can develop somewhere besides the aquifer. So rather than saying, don't go there, you just say, do go here, and here's water lines, sewer lines, this is stuff that makes makes you more able to develop over here instead of on the aquifer. And we just have a disproportionate focus, almost a fascination with the aquifer, an overestimation of its vulnerability, an overestimation of how much growth is going to happen. If 30 more lots are built on in the APOZ, you know, let's say north of the interstate, between the north of I-80 and to, like, I don't know, the backside of Indian Hills, that has no effect. You know, we're sort of haggling through something that, you know, that the opportunity to develop is going away. That the demand for growth that Laramie is seeing right now requires something more than a house here and a house there, and something and something, right? We just have this shiny penny that we're all looking at, and we're missing the point about what Albany County needs, and that is development somewhere else. There isn't a massive push to develop on the aquifer. There just isn't. There's a massive pushback to not, to the point that a lot of people just won't even fool with it. Yet here we are. So
18 minutes, Commissioner Richardson, just to let you know.
I'm about to quit.
Okay.
The point is that there isn't a lot of new development possible up there, and we're not using our time well as public officials, focusing on the aquifer all the time. And that has always been my position, and it has always been misconstrued and misunderstood. For the amount of risk that's there versus the amount of developable land, it's this isn't a high value exercise what we're doing here. South of the interstate, Mountain Cement is holding all of that land and the minerals on it to make limes, you know, to make cement for the next 2 centuries or whatever. They're holding it in reserve, and they don't even charge us anything for it. You know, they just, nobody can develop there because they aren't selling, right? We just have to develop our infrastructure somewhere else and stop thinking about this, with the exception of the I-80 corridor, because of transportation and the things that happen there, and maybe where the railroad crosses the aquifer. So separate from that, I don't know who wrote these, because I have never been part of that. I mean, I'm in the minority. I don't know who wrote this stuff, but I do think that if it's somebody who's sitting on the planning commission right now, that's entirely inappropriate. But I can't tell you that I know whether that person participated in this or not. But if you're a sitting planning commissioner member, you can't, it would be inappropriate to conspire to make an end run around the commission that you swore an oath when you got on. So I don't support this, and I won't vote for it, not because I want dirty water, and I think that, you know, landowner rights trump the common good or some Marxist thing like that. I just think that this isn't where we're at. This isn't appropriate for what the situation is on the aquifer. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Richardson. I'll be considerably briefer than that. So I got to tell you, thank you for restoring my faith in public meetings and the ability of people to disagree without being disagreeable. I think this is a rare thing, and I'm hopeful it can be replicated throughout this country. And so you should be commended for that. There is passions on both sides. And do I believe those people who don't support these aquifer regulations don't want clean water? No. Do I believe that those people who support these regulations don't like private property rights? I don't believe that also, right? There's just a difference of opinion, and that's all right. In fact, that's a good thing. That's a thing that allows us to make really move this community forward to make progress. So thank you. So the Albany County Planning and Zoning Commission, as well as the Albany County Commission, has been working on this document for almost the entire tenure of my time on the commission. I was elected in 2018. I started in 2019. 2 years on this, right? And so when I think that, and when it's said that these weren't discussed and mulled over and thought about, that's just not true, right? I am certainly not a septic expert, but I have read a bunch of stuff to the point where I feel like I can be conversant with people, right? Not with septic experts, not with hydrologists, not with geologists, but with people. I can understand the basics of how they work. You know, I fly a plane outside of this work, but I would never suppose that I could build a plane. And so I think that's really important to understand, right? Mr. Richardson unloads septic systems, right? That does not make him an expert, nor does it make me an expert, right? Because I've read. And so I think you have to understand that expertise is earned and learned. So with the resources important in this Casper Aquifer, it's important to do all that you can to make sure that it's protected now and in the future. For those of you with clean water, thank you. That's awesome, right? I am so grateful, right? I wish everybody could have clean aquifer on this, or clean water on this aquifer for years and years to come. As a kid who grew up in Western Wyoming, I spent the first 18 years on a water well with septic systems. So once again, I know how important that clean water is. So when you go to make decisions, how do you make them? Well, I like to think about making them from 30,000 feet and then down. If septic systems didn't impact water sources, you have to ask yourself the question, why wouldn't they build them right around your water well? Well, we know the answer to that, right? We know why you don't build them in your basement, because there is some contamination. And we get hung up on nitrates, and I agree with you. That's just one measure of the septic effluent. So we're not measuring many of the other parts and pieces and chemicals that come into a well or from a septic system. So it's important. So what do you do? How do you make a decision if you're a guy like me? You read what you can, you listen as much as you can, and I'll just point you to a few studies. There was a delayed data collection for domestic wells in the city of Laramie in 2009 and 2010. Of the 500 wells on the Aquifer Protection Overlay Zone, 100 were tested. That's a statistically significant result. There's no modeling. There's no theory. This is water testing. Divided up into north and northeast, northwest, southwest corridors. 10 wells tested in the northwest. First of all, let me give you the background. The background, less than 2 milligrams per liter was decided as background. So that is what comes to a person's water just by being in that formation. Impacted was 2 to 5 milligrams per liter. Significant impact, 5 to less than 10 milligrams per liter. Unsafe, 10 milligrams per liter or more. So the northwest of those 10 wells, 5 were impacted, meaning they were above from 2 to 5. 5 were either significantly impacted or unsafe. So half of those wells were significantly impacted or unsafe. Southwest part of the interchange, 26 wells were tested. There was no impact on 31%. So 7, 8 wells, no impact whatsoever. There was 35% that was impacted. That means 2 to 5 milligrams per liter. There was a full 32% that either were significantly impacted or unsafe. Well, does that always make that you have all the information and that's what you do? No, but I do think it's a data point that's concerning. It should be concerning for all of us, right? I would not want to be out in the county on the APOS zone if my water was foul. Talk about a reduction in the cost of your property. Right, that is a really difficult thing to overcome. We heard Mr. Monson talk about 12 milligrams per liter. That's unsafe, according to the EPA standards. That's nitrate measurements. What else is in that water? I'm sure Mr. Monson knows, I don't know. But so with the resources afforded as a Casper Aquifer, important you do all that you can to make sure it's protected for now and in the future. I sympathize with those that might be impacted by their inclusion in the APOS. Please know that there's an opportunity for proposed regulations to be excluded from the APOS. I think it's important. If you shouldn't be in there, you shouldn't be in there. For those that cannot be excluded from the APOS, I'm hopeful that the county might be able to find funding for you should you incur costs you cannot afford because of your situation. Current Arpa funding discusses water treatment and also the proposed congressional bills that are being supposed right now all deal with water. In the end, it's important to the health, economic development, and recruitment of people and businesses that we protect the water. This is the water source for 450 county residents, sole water source for many of you. And 60% of the water for the county residents that live in the city. Remember, we all live in the county. And I'm reminded of that as I pay my taxes this week at the county treasurer, right? We are all members of the county. So that said, I really do appreciate your willingness to handle a very difficult subject with calmness, grace, and demeanor. I have to, however, say, you can't impugn a person or persons from this dais. I believe we're held to a higher standard. I would never subject my thoughts and my innuendos to a member of the Planning and Zoning Commission. That's just not how this goes. You might disagree with that. But to say or to insinuate that somebody was backdealing as a Planning and Zoning Commissioner is just not Albany County Commissioner standards.
Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me,
I
Mr.
said
Richardson.
if
Mr. Richardson.
that happened, that would be inappropriate.
Okay.
If it didn't, then it's not.
Just as in the rail tie, this commission stood up for you. Just as in this time, I think Mr. Richardson has every right to make and weigh in on this decision. I do not believe his work disqualifies him. I think we owe that to people that we do and do not support. So in the end, I'll be voting for these regulations because in my mind, it's the most prudent and best way forward. Should you have a discussion, should you have problems with any of these regulations that you cannot afford, please send me an email. Please use my phone number. You can contact me. I do believe that the county commission should be part of the solutions too. We understand the impact of these regulations. So thank you very much. I sure do appreciate it. This is the second meeting where I have been so proud to live in Albany County. And so with that, I'd entertain a motion for item 33.
Mr. Chair, I move that we approve the amendments to the Albany County zoning resolution.
Second. Moved and seconded. Any further discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
I would like to point out that sort of the overarching wave of, you know, this is what's good, it still does not deal with the grainy details of why certain things are a certain way in a certain place and not in others. Nitrates are naturally occurring. If the background level is set at 2 instead of 4, that makes a huge difference in, you know, how you would make statistics work for or against a position when it comes to impacted, whether wells are impacted by septics or, let's say, nitrates at larger. The best measure to figure out whether wells are affected by nitrates is to measure chlorides, salts, because septic systems, I guess people eat a lot of salt, and septic systems tend to concentrate those. So alongside the nitrate marker, because nitrates are naturally occurring, you can have, like I'm pretty confident I live way upstream from, because I live on the aquifer, there aren't a lot of nitrate sources above my well, but my well regularly tests at 6, you know, up gradient. So is that the background for my area? The challenge that we have in this situation is that this is real for people. There is no grant money. That's a theory. That's an idea that could make somebody feel better about what the commission is going to do today. But what happens is when we make a regulation change, we don't go back. We go onto we're deluged. This is like drinking from a fire hose. What we're doing is we're making it so that the burden of this belongs to individual property owners. Period. You know, I guess you could beg for help outside of that, but there is no program set up. So for everyone who's in receipt or on the receiving end of this, what this means is that that you are de facto going to be on the hook to do whatever needs to be done to comply with this. And there is no help coming. I mean, unless you can, it's too complicated to go find it. It's not coming. It's harder than to just pay for it your own self. The reason that the wells in the Laramie Plains subdivision, that would be the northwest sector, test poorly is one, because see, the devil is in the details. Lots of them are 50 years old, more than 50 years old. Lots of them are open hole. So you drill the big steel pipe with perforations at the bottom down through all the layers, but lots of these are only cemented to top 15 to 30 feet. They're not sealed. They're not cased and sealed all the way down to the production zone. So if you have a well here that's pristine and a well here that's not, that doesn't mean that there's a plume of nitrates in the aquifer. That means that this well that's 200 feet from the other one has nitrates and the other one doesn't. So why does that well have nitrates? Maybe it's because there's horses rubbing their butts on the wellhead and pooping right there, because every time a horse rubs his butt, he poops. And it's going right down the annulus of the well. And when the city did this study that you were doing, because of my business, I had the ability to talk to a lot of people who did that. And the method of testing was that you come and open the tap and get a sample. Well, if you buy a house, if you want to test what's in the well, that's what you do. If you want to test what's in the aquifer, you have to run the volume of the, you know, you got to do the math to figure out how much water column is in the well, and then you have to pump double that so that you know that all the water that's coming up to you at the tap is new water that came from the aquifer, wasn't sitting in the well. But none of that was done in that testing. So basically, if I went on vacation for 3 weeks and it rained and there's water running down the annulus of my well that's not cased all the way down to and sealed, cemented to the zone of production, then I might have a temporary elevated nitrate rate in my well that isn't representative of what's in the aquifer. And if I ran my water for an hour, or if let's say I want to buy a home and I get the water tested, but nobody's lived there for 4 months because it's just been sitting there. Now I'm testing the water that's in the well unless I run it for a long time so that I can test the water that I'm going to eventually be using, because it's probably not 4 month water that's been sitting in the well casing for 4 months. So there's all of these things that happen that make us think that what we're seeing is the reality, but it's not. And I've been studying this and dealing with this for so long. I am not an irrational person. I am not a mean person. I'm not unintelligent. I am none of these things. I'm quite the opposite. If I thought that the water on the aquifer was in jeopardy and required our action to do something to protect it, it would have been done before either of the two of you got here. But every time I study more and more and learn more and more, I keep learning that the aquifer is more resilient rather than the other way around. This isn't, I don't have a bias. I don't have a bias for or against septic systems, even though I'm in the business. I don't have a bias for or against development in a particular place. For me, it's just been all about gathering facts and understanding. I'm reminded of some pilots that were going to land in San Francisco, and they were in the middle of the night, and they were told that one of the runways was going to be closed. And before they got there, the runway, they turned the lights off completely to do some sort of maintenance. So the pilots are coming in and they see one runway and they see all the aircraft lined up in the taxiway queue next to it. And they line up with the right side runway because it never occurred to them that the left runway would have its lights off. So now you have a left runway that's all lit up, and a right runway that's a little darker, but somehow because you have expectations in your mind fills in what it doesn't know based on your expectations. So the pilots go to land on the taxiway with a whole bunch of aircraft parked facing them, and the reason that the taxiway looked so lit up was the landing gear lights of all these airplanes. How could a pilot mistake a taxiway for a runway? Well, it had everything to do with the fact that the other runway had its lights shut off. They almost landed on a whole row of planes, 1,000 people or something, plus what they have in their airplane, and they averted it by 35 feet. So my point is, it's a point about confirmation bias. Sometimes you look at something and the assumptions that you make or the way that your mind fills in what's happening can interfere with your ability to be a critical thinker, even when you suppose and imagine that you are. So for that reason, and this is an exercise that I've been doing my entire time as a commissioner and before. And I have found it massively frustrating. You can feel good, right, approving the regulations because then it puts an issue to bed or something. Except then you don't have to accept the pain. So you can say, hey, you guys, this is good for everyone. You do this with us and for us, except that it's not with us and for us. You guys get to bear the burden. There's no program to help people deal with whatever this commission would decide their impacts or violations or whatever would be on the aquifer. They are on their own. We don't have a set aside, to fund. And when people are talking about takings, they're talking about a taking through regulation. If I make it so the starting cost to do anything on a piece of property through regulation is a start point of an additional 30,000, which is what those enhanced systems do. That is a de facto, in my opinion, taking. It's saying, you guys, because of some category we're putting you in, you have to bear that cost. And no one else does. No one has to share it with you. If I had a conflict of interest, I would advocate like crazy for these septic systems, because they have all kinds of little relays and electronic boards and pumps and things that cost a lot of money. If I were to bid a standard septic system in, like a normal conventional one in that type of media, that's dirt up there, the sewer line from the house through the tank, risers, leach field, 8,000 or 9,000. The components for an enhanced system are 15,000, and the labor's more, and you can't just do it with an excavator. You have electricians, and you got to go in and put, a breaker in the house so you can have a dedicated circuit to that thing, and put conduit in the ground, and all of these things that make it a $25,000 proposition. And the maintenance required, if none of the components fail, is triple. So it costs the property owner triple over a 30-year lifetime of the maintenance. So that the upfront cost is triple and the maintenance cost is triple, providing none of the mechanical components fail. And they do all the time. So I just feel like it actually wouldn't bother me to do this if I thought that this was the solution to a problem, but I actually don't see that a problem exists. If I had a fund to go to the Laramie Plains subdivision and plug and abandon wells that have nitrates in them and drill new ones that are completed down to the production, to the depth of production, what we would see is that the nitrates would go way, way down, or basically go to background levels. There was one in the Valley View subdivision that had nitrates of, 20 or something. It was crazy. It was right in the middle of a guy's horse pasture, and he plugged and abandoned it and moved over 30 feet or something and drilled a new one, and he was back to background levels. He was down below 2, because that actually is where the best water is in the Laramie Plains. In the Valley View and Sage area, and that's actually where the smallest lots are. Those lots are really tiny. So we make all kinds of assumptions about what we think we know about density or septic systems and their proximity to a well. You're right. You don't put a septic system in the basement. You don't put it any less than 100 feet. So from a well. So why would we establish a density at 35 acres when 100 feet is adequate to separate those from each other and not pollute the well? If 75 feet were enough, I'm sure that would be the standard. So actually 75 feet is enough, 50 is enough, but 100 has some safety built into it. I don't know. The nature of these rules and the way that they're written, the process that was followed or not followed to do this is going to result in litigation, and it makes me sad because we can do better work than this when we don't have an agenda. That's all I have.
Anything?
Yeah, I don't know whether you can flat out say, Commissioner Richardson, that there isn't help out there. There are other counties in Wyoming that have started to routinely require this and have found funding available to help these homeowners. And I don't think
Maybe we
that is an
could,
impossibility.
maybe we could find the funding before we approve.
Mr. Richardson.
You had your opportunity to speak, and I did not interrupt you at all. Second, as far as who wrote these papers, you know that I sat with David. Well, I met with David twice and doing some of the writing. It's been worked on for 2 years. You were part of that yourself even before I came on. There has been plenty of public input, opportunities for public input. So to act like, oh, I don't have no idea where this came from.
That is not a reasonable statement, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Richardson, could you just?
The current iteration of the rules has been written in the last 2 months without any oversight. Way after the.
Mr. Richardson, come on, man, right? Like, we have a decorum here where
Yes, we
nobody
do.
interrupted you during your speech.
Mr. Richardson,
That's an important, I don't know if I'm gonna get a chance to speak again, and that's an important point.
just remember, all these
The
people.
language in these is
Please,
brand new.
Please, all these people here dealt tonight with respect and dignity, and
You know, I am
ask that you
too.
do that. No,
I
you're
am too.
interrupting me. I didn't
Yes, I am.
interrupt you in your 20 minutes twice of talking. I did not interrupt you.
You did not write these regulations. You don't have the expertise to put in there what's in there. Who's your
I'm not-
ghostwriter?
I'm not saying I have expertise.
Mr. Richardson,
This has
could you
been worked on
just
for
let
some
this be
time.
finished, right?
Yes,
I mean,
I
thank you.
can.
Okay.
Since we know how I'm going to vote, or not,
Okay,
I'm gonna go home and make love to my wife.
okay. Mr. Barra, please. Okay. Well, so I think it's important when you write regulations to figure out exactly who it impacts and how it impacts, right? So I figured, as an existing homeowner in the existing APOD, Sherman Hills, for instance, there is an exemption from doing an SSI for any accessory building, structure, or addition. That was not previous. So there's an exemption from an SSI. There's a benefit. There's no change because the DEQ was controlling anyway, right? We've done nothing to say anything about the DEQ. We can't, right? Their authority supersedes our authority. And there's no change. You just still cannot install, maintain, or use a septic system within 100 feet of a vulnerable feature unless is no significant threat to groundwater. That's no change. So there is a net benefit to people who are on the APOS existing, from my read of the regulations. And the existing homeowner outside the existing APOS, but inside the proposed area, the Laramie Plains subdivision. You'll be able to petition for the exclusion from the APOS. You'll become subject to the table of prohibited uses. You'll be required to properly maintain a septic system, and you'll be required to provide an SSI for development, if not exempt. So if your subdivision is not prior to 2012, if your subdivision is prior to 2012, you'll be exempt. And then you become subject to the DEQ. Yes, there's impact. I'll be more than happy to figure out a solution for those people and their impact. So, you know, I'm short of it. I don't take this lightly. I've done what I can. I mean, you're a perfect human being and you do the best you can. And so somewhere along the line, somebody will tell me either yes or no, that that was a smart choice, and then you move on. But in the end, I'd like to thank you all for having the decorum that this commission could not muster. Important that at least somebody in this room model a decent behavior. And so thank you for that. I'm hopeful that we can reach that model. So it's been moved and seconded. Is there any further discussion? Hearing and seeing none, all those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye, all those opposed? And Commissioner Richardson abstaining, I'm taking it, or didn't. Seeing no business before this county commission on November 2nd, 2021, I move to adjourn the meeting of the county commission. Thank you all for your attendance. Thank you all for your thoughtful comments. I appreciate it.
Yes. And it is put in those notes that you said you will find a way for these people to be able to afford it.
I will find a way.
Okay.
Hey, Pete, are you still there? Pete? Are you there?